Coworker stole my promotion by sleeping with boss. His wife was CEO. Mar, my identical twin. Stole my wedding by pretending to be me. I always knew I'd be the one to marry him first. Rebecca whispered to me through the bathroom door at our rehearsal dinner. You were just keeping him warm for me. Those words echoed in my mind as I stood in the empty church sanctuary 24 hours later, still in my wedding dress, watching police officers take statements from confused guests. My name is Hannah Miller, I'm 28 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant in Portland, Oregon. And my identical twin sister had just committed the most elaborate identity theft of my life. She had literally stolen my wedding and married my fiancé while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day I learned that the two people I trusted most in the world had orchestrated the cruelest betrayal I could imagine. But as I stood there, watching Ryan, my former fiancé, being questioned by detectives while still wearing his tuxedo, something cold and calculating settled in my chest. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I was already planning. You see, most people don't know what a forensic accountant actually does. We're financial detectives. We follow money trails that people think they've hidden. We uncover fraud that seems impossible to prove. We document everything because in my world, if you can't prove it with paper trails and digital evidence, it didn't happen. And as I watched this chaos unfold around what should have been my wedding reception, I realized I had been gathering evidence of a conspiracy without even knowing it. Let me start from the beginning, because the devil, as they say in my profession, is always in the details. Ryan Morrison and I met 6 years ago at Morrison & Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm where he was a junior partner and I was a senior associate. It was a classic workplace romance, late nights during tax season, shared Chinese takeout over spreadsheets, stolen moments in the supply closet. He was charming, ambitious, and came from one of those old Portland families that had money going back 3 generations. I was the scholarship kid who worked her way through Portland State. But somehow, we clicked. Rebecca, my twin sister, was the opposite of everything I represented. While I was methodical and careful, she was impulsive and reckless. I had a career. She had a series of part-time jobs and failed business ventures. I saved money. She spent it faster than she could make it. But we were identical twins, and that bond felt unbreakable. When Ryan proposed to me 18 months ago at Multnomah Falls, Rebecca was the first person I called. She cried, or at least I thought they were happy tears. The first sign something was wrong came 8 months ago during our engagement party. I caught Rebecca and Ryan in what appeared to be an intense conversation by the catering station. When I approached, they both immediately smiled and changed the subject to something mundane about the flowers. Rebecca's laugh seemed too loud, too forced. Ryan's hand lingered on her arm just a fraction of a second too long. But I was in love, planning a wedding, and convinced my paranoia was just pre-marriage jitters. The second sign was financial. As a forensic accountant, I automatically noticed discrepancies, and I'd started noticing small inconsistencies in Ryan's spending patterns. Nothing major, just little charges that didn't match his usual habits. A coffee shop in Rebecca's neighborhood that he claimed he'd never been to. Dinner charges for 2 when he said he'd eaten alone. Gas station purchases in areas where he had no business being. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, Ryan had access to our joint credit card for wedding expenses. There had to be innocent explanations. The third sign was Rebecca's sudden interest in wedding planning. My sister had never shown interest in romantic commitment of any kind, but suddenly she was full of opinions about our venue, our flowers, our menu choices. She insisted on coming to every dress fitting, every cake tasting, every vendor meeting. She said she wanted to be involved because she was my maid of honor, but looking back, I realized she was memorizing every detail of my wedding so she could execute it perfectly. The smoking gun came 3 weeks before our wedding date, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was reviewing our joint bank statements for budgeting purposes when I noticed a charge for $847 to a specialty cosmetics store in downtown Portland. When I asked Ryan about it, he said he'd bought me a surprise for our honeymoon. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. But something nagged at me, so I did what I do best. I investigated. The charge was to a place called Performance Cosmetics and Prosthetics, which specialized in theatrical makeup and special effects. I called them directly, claiming I needed to verify a charge for my accountant. The helpful sales associate told me that someone matching Rebecca's description had purchased an advanced contouring kit, professional-grade foundation, and something called Identity Transformation Consultation. The consultation, she explained, was for people who needed to look exactly like someone else for film or theater purposes. That night, I confronted Ryan. He swore it was for a surprise. Maybe he was planning some kind of themed honeymoon activity. Maybe it was related to a surprise party. His explanations were plausible enough, and I was so deep in wedding planning stress that I convinced myself I was overthinking everything. But I did something that night that would save my life later. I made copies of all our financial records and stored them in a safety deposit box that only I had access to. Call it professional paranoia. The final piece of the puzzle was the most innocent-looking detail of all. 2 days before our wedding, Rebecca suggested we get matching manicures and pedicures at her favorite salon. She'd never been interested in twin bonding activities, but I was touched by the gesture. We spent the afternoon getting pampered, and I thought we were having a genuine sister moment. She even took photos of our identical nails, joking about how no one would be able to tell us apart. I should have realized she was practicing. The morning of my wedding dawned gray and drizzly, typical Oregon weather, but not what you want on your special day. I was staying at the Heathman Hotel downtown, while Ryan was at his apartment across town. The plan was simple: hair and makeup at the hotel salon, then transportation to Pioneer Courthouse Square for photos, then to the church for the ceremony. At 4 p.m. At 11:47 a.m., exactly 4 hours and 13 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I got a call that changed everything. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had fallen down the stairs of our apartment building and was being rushed to the hospital. She had listed me as her emergency contact because she had no family in Portland, and the paramedics said she was asking for me specifically. I should have sent Rebecca. I should have sent anyone else. But Mrs. Chen had been like a grandmother to me since I moved to Portland, and she was scared and alone. I threw on jeans and a sweater over my hair extensions and drove to Providence Portland Medical Center as fast as I legally could. Mrs. Chen's injuries were serious but not life-threatening, a broken hip and some bruising. But she was disoriented and kept calling for me. I held her hand in the emergency room while we waited for her surgery, texting Rebecca constant updates about the timeline. She assured me everything was under control, that she'd coordinate with the hair and makeup team, and that I'd be back in plenty of time for the final preparations. At 2:15 p.m., while I was in the surgical waiting room, I got a text from Rebecca. Hair and makeup team had to leave for another appointment. Don't worry, I've got everything covered. Just focus on Mrs. Chen. See you at the altar. At 2:18 p.m., I received another text from my wedding planner. Running a few minutes behind, but the bride party is en route to the church. Everything looks beautiful. I was confused. How could my bridal party be en route when I was sitting in a hospital waiting room? I called my wedding planner, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried calling my other bridesmaids, but their phones were apparently turned off or silenced. I tried calling Ryan, but his phone was off too, which made sense since grooms traditionally don't talk to brides on wedding days. At 3:30 p.m., 30 minutes before my ceremony, Mrs. Chen's surgeon came out to tell me the operation had been successful. I hugged him, thanked him, and ran to my car. I was still in jeans and a sweater. My hair was falling out of its pins, and I had exactly 30 minutes to get across town and somehow transform into a bride. I was speeding down Burnside when my phone rang. It was my college roommate, Jessica, who was supposed to be one of my bridesmaids. Hannah, where are you? The ceremony already started. What? That's impossible. I'm on my way to the church right now. But, you're already here. I mean, I can see you at the altar. You look beautiful, by the way, but why didn't you answer when I waved at you? The world tilted sideways. I pulled over and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Jessica, describe what I'm wearing. Your wedding dress, obviously. The ivory silk one with the beaded bodice that you showed me pictures of. And your grandmother's pearl necklace. Hannah, are you okay? You sound weird. I hung up and called 911, 911, what's your emergency? My identity is being stolen. Someone is impersonating me at my own wedding. I need police at Pioneer Community Church on East Morrison immediately." The dispatcher was confused, understandably. Identity theft usually involves credit cards and social security numbers, not walking down the aisle. But something in my voice must have convinced her, because she agreed to send a unit to check it out. I arrived at the church at 4:23 p.m. The parking lot was full of cars belonging to my friends and family. Through the stained glass windows, I could hear the organ playing and voices reciting vows. My vows. The vows I had written for Ryan, being spoken by someone else in my voice. I tried the front doors, but they were locked. Standard procedure during ceremonies to prevent interruptions. I tried the side entrance, but that was locked too. Finally, I found a back door that led to the church kitchen, and I let myself in. From the kitchen, I could hear everything. The officiant was asking Ryan to repeat his vows. Then I heard my own voice, or what sounded exactly like my voice, responding with the vows I had written and memorized. The congregation was silent except for a few sniffles and camera clicks. I crept to the door that connected the kitchen to the sanctuary and peered through the small window. There, at the altar, in my wedding dress, wearing my grandmother's pearls, holding my bouquet and marrying my fiancé, was my identical twin sister. She had perfectly replicated my hairstyle, my makeup, even the small beauty mark I had just above my left elbow, which she had drawn on with what I now knew was professional theatrical makeup. Ryan was looking at her with complete adoration, completely unaware that he was marrying the wrong woman. The officiant was someone I didn't recognize, not our original officiant, Pastor Williams, who had counseled us for months and would have immediately known the difference between Rebecca and me. Watched, frozen in shock, as they exchanged rings. My rings. The wedding set that Ryan and I had chosen together, that was supposed to symbolize our eternal commitment to each other. By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. And I watched my fiancé kiss my sister at my own wedding. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. Camera flashes went off. Someone started throwing rose petals. And in that moment, as I watched the two people I had loved most in the world celebrate their betrayal of me, something fundamental shifted inside me. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't devastated. I was coldly, calculatingly furious. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. The congregation filing out, congratulating me on my beautiful ceremony. Rebecca, in my dress, hugging my parents and accepting their tearful congratulations. Ryan, shaking hands with my father and thanking him for raising such an incredible daughter. Then I called my backup plan, because as a forensic accountant, I always have a backup plan. 6 months earlier, when I first started noticing the discrepancies in Ryan's spending, I had quietly hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb. Marcus was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations, and I had used his services professionally to track down hidden assets in divorce cases. I never told anyone about hiring Marcus, not even my therapist, because I felt guilty for investigating my own fiancé. But now I was grateful for my paranoid preparation. Marcus, it's Hannah Miller. I need you at Pioneer Community Church immediately. Bring cameras. Bring everything. The case just broke wide open. While I waited for Marcus, I called my bank and put a freeze on all joint accounts. I called our wedding planner and the original officiant to confirm what I suspected, that Rebecca had canceled our original arrangements and substituted her own. I called the hotel venue where our reception was supposed to be held and discovered that the reservation had been changed to a different location under Rebecca's name. By the time the police arrived, I had documented everything. The fraudulent officiant, who Marcus quickly identified as someone Rebecca had met through her bartending job, not a real minister. The forged signatures on the marriage license application. The credit card charges showing that Rebecca had used Ryan's card to pay for her own version of our wedding. But the most damning evidence was something I hadn't expected to find. When Marcus arrived and started taking photos of the scene, he had news for me. Hannah, I've been tracking them both for months, just like you asked. They've been meeting regularly at a motel in Beaverton, but it's bigger than just an affair. Your sister has been systematically studying everything about your relationship with Ryan. She has notebooks full of information about your habits, your preferences, your mannerisms. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated identity. Theft. He showed me photographs on his camera. Rebecca entering the motel. Ryan arriving 20 minutes later. But also photos of Rebecca sitting in her car outside the accounting firm, watching Ryan and me through the windows. Photos of her following us to restaurants, to movies, to couples counseling sessions. She had been stalking my relationship for months, learning everything she needed to know to replace me. But the smoking gun was a photo Marcus had taken just 3 days earlier. Rebecca and Ryan at the bank, opening a new joint account under the name Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Morrison. They had been planning to access my money once they were legally married. When the police finally entered the church reception area, what they found was my sister and my ex-fiancé cutting the cake I had chosen, surrounded by my friends and family, completely convinced that they had just witnessed my wedding. The confusion was immediate and dramatic. My mother saw me walk in wearing jeans and a sweater and started crying. "Hannah, why aren't you in your wedding dress? Why did you change clothes?" My father looked back and forth between me and Rebecca, who was still in my wedding dress with complete bewilderment. I don't understand what's happening. But the most satisfying moment was watching Ryan's face when he realized what had happened. The color drained from his face completely. He looked at me, then at Rebecca, then back at me. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Rebecca, however, was defiant until the end. "You were always jealous of me," she hissed as the police officer read her rights. "They'll never believe you. We're identical twins. You could be me just as easily as I could be you." But that's where she made her final mistake. Because while we were identical twins, we weren't identical in every way that mattered legally. 3 years earlier, I had been in a minor car accident that required surgery to repair a torn ligament in my left shoulder. The surgery had left a small but distinctive scar that was visible in certain types of photography. Rebecca didn't have that scar, and it was clearly visible in every photo from our childhood and modeling portfolio that Marcus had collected as evidence. More importantly, as a forensic accountant, I had been fingerprinted and background checked multiple times for security clearances. Rebecca had been arrested twice in college for underage drinking, and her fingerprints were in the system. When the police ran the prints on the marriage license, they proved definitively that Rebecca had signed my name. But the final nail in Rebecca's coffin was something she couldn't have anticipated. The morning of the wedding, when I had gone to YK, the hospital to be with Mrs. Chen, I had signed multiple medical documents as her emergency contact. The timestamps on those documents, verified by hospital security cameras showing me in the emergency room, proved conclusively that I could not have been in two places at once. Ryan tried to claim he had been deceived, that he was as much a victim as I was. But Marcus had months of evidence showing that Ryan had been meeting with Rebecca secretly, planning this elaborate deception. The financial records showed that Ryan had been systematically moving assets into accounts that Rebecca could access once they were married. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity. It was conspiracy to commit fraud. The marriage was annulled within 72 hours on grounds of fraud and false identity. The district attorney filed charges for identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and theft of services for the wedding vendors they had defrauded. Ryan was suspended from his position at the accounting firm pending investigation, and his CPA license was under review. But I wasn't done. Remember, I'm a forensic accountant. This is what I do for a living. And when I started digging deeper into Ryan's finances, what I found was far worse than a stolen wedding. Ryan had been embezzling money from client accounts at Morrison & Associates for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, just a few $100s that he would replace before anyone noticed. But over time, the amounts had gotten larger and the replacement periods had gotten longer. By the time of our wedding, he had stolen nearly $127,000 from 4 different client accounts. The money had been going to support Rebecca's lifestyle and to pay for their secret apartment in Beaverton where they had been meeting. But it had also been funding an elaborate plan to leave the country after our wedding. They had been planning to use our honeymoon in Italy as an escape route, liquidating our joint assets and disappearing with enough money to start over somewhere without extradition treaties. I turned all of this evidence over to the FBI, the Oregon State Board of Accountancy, and the Portland Police Bureau's White-Collar Crime Division. Ryan's embezzlement case became a federal matter because some of the stolen money had been transferred across state lines. 6 months later, Ryan Morrison was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the clients he had defrauded. His CPA license was revoked permanently, and he was banned from working in any financial capacity for life. Rebecca was sentenced to 2 years for identity theft and fraud. She was also ordered to pay restitution for all the wedding costs and damages. But perhaps more importantly to her, the case made local news, and her mugshot was featured prominently in every article. For someone who had always been vain about her appearance and relied on her looks to manipulate people, the public shame was devastating. But the most satisfying part of my revenge was much simpler than criminal justice. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor whose medical emergency had prevented me from being at my own wedding, recovered fully from her surgery. When she learned what had happened, that her accident had inadvertently saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life, she insisted on throwing me a celebration of freedom party. That party, held 8 months after my stolen wedding date, was attended by everyone who mattered to me. My real friends, the ones who had been confused and horrified when they learned the truth. My parents, who were devastated that they had been deceived but proud of how I had handled the situation. My colleagues from work, who respected my professionalism throughout the entire ordeal. But the guest of honor was my new boyfriend, David Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, who had flown in from Seattle to help care for her after her surgery, and who had asked me out 3 months earlier after we met in her hospital room. David was everything Ryan had pretended to be: honest, loyal, and completely transparent about his feelings and intentions. He was a software engineer who worked for Microsoft, and when I told him the whole story of my stolen wedding, his response was perfect. "Well, at least I know you're thorough when it comes to background checks." At the party, Mrs. Chen made a toast that brought tears to my eyes. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that happens to you. If Hannah hadn't come to help me that day, she would have married a liar and a thief. Instead, she discovered the truth and found real love. I'm proud to have played a small part in saving her life. A year later, David and I were married in a small ceremony at Multnomah Falls, the same place Ryan had originally proposed to me. But this time, everything was real. The love was real, the commitment was real, and the identity of the bride was definitely, provably real. Mrs. Chen was my maid of honor. Ryan is still in federal prison. His earliest possible release date is next year, but with his criminal record and revoked CPA license, his prospects are limited. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's working in the prison kitchen and taking correspondence courses in automotive repair. Rebecca has been out of prison for 6 months. She moved to Phoenix, where she's working as a waitress and living in a studio apartment. She's required to pay me restitution of $347 monthly until the court-ordered judgment is satisfied, which will take approximately 12 more years. Every month when I receive that check, I donate it to a victims' rights organization. They never apologized. Not once, not ever. But I didn't need their apologies to move on with my life. Sometimes people ask me if I miss them, if I'm sad that I lost my twin sister and my first serious relationship on the same day. The answer is no. What I lost that day wasn't real. The sister who could betray me so completely was never really my sister, just someone who happened to share my DNA. The fiancé who could conspire to steal my identity and my money was never really my partner, just someone who was using me as a means to an end. What I gained was much more valuable: self-respect, a career that I love, and a marriage based on honesty and mutual respect instead of deception and financial gain. I'm often asked if they succeeded in anything with their elaborate scheme. In one sense, they did. They succeeded in showing me exactly who they really were. They succeeded in demonstrating that my instincts and professional skills were accurate. They succeeded in proving that I was strong enough to handle the worst betrayal imaginable and come out stronger on the other side. But most importantly, they succeeded in clearing the way for me to find real love with someone who would never dream of deceiving me. David knows all my passwords, has access to all my accounts, and has never given me a moment's reason to doubt his honesty. When people comment on how trusting our relationship seems given what I've been through, I tell them that it's easy to trust someone who has earned it. These days, I specialize professionally in helping other fraud victims recover their assets and their lives. The skills I developed investigating my own case have made me one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the Pacific Northwest. I've helped dozens of people uncover financial deception, and I've testified as an expert witness in several high-profile fraud cases. Every case reminds me of the same truth I learned that day in the church kitchen. The people who betray you always underestimate you. They assume you're naive, that you'll never fight back, that you don't have the skills or resources to expose their deception. They're always wrong. My advice to anyone facing betrayal is simple. Document everything, trust your instincts, and remember that revenge is a dish best served with proper legal counsel and a paper trail that would make the IRS proud. Sometimes, karma needs an accountant, and sometimes justice arrives wearing jeans and a sweater, carrying a safety deposit box full of evidence, with a private investigator on speed dial, and a very clear understanding of federal fraud statutes. Justice isn't always poetic, but when it's properly documented and legally airtight, it's absolutely beautiful. Beautiful.